It's a little anticlimactic to have it be just all the names, but God is just kind of buttoning up this whole scenario of where this land is, how this land is going to be divided. Now, if you look at your packet that I gave you this week, chapter 48, you'll see, after we get past the readings, this first page here. Let's see. Now, the reason that I have this is because this seems to be the two most popular, that I can see, that I could find, the two most popular ways that the land of Israel is going to be divided up according to Ezekiel 48. So you can see at the top, do you remember all those maps that I gave you where it shows a huge chunk of land out? Okay, this was new to me. I had learned this just in my last study on this chapter. I was not there when Arnold taught this chapter 48, and so I didn't get to read it. I didn't hear how he presented it from there. But this is called, when the land is divided in that big chunk of land that you've seen the maps that I've drawn before, that is called Greater Israel. Okay? And as you can see why, it's a huge chunk. Not everyone believes that that is the amount of land that Israel is going to get. That was new to me. I thought it was. I thought that was common knowledge that everyone believed that because I've seen that over and over and over again. But that's not true. There are many people who believe that Greater Israel is the amount of land that God gave to Abraham for all of his sons when he divides the land up. So in Genesis 15, it says, starting in verse 18, it says, "On the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, 'To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. The Kenites, the Kizanites, the Kadamites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites.'" So that's all of that land that we see in large portions that they teach that God gave to Abraham, not just the land of Canaan. The most land, the most land that Israel ever inhabited was when David and Solomon were rulers. And David and Solomon got the most land for inhabitation. Now, it was very similar to what you see in this second map down here. Not quite. This second map is a little bit larger, especially up towards the top, of land that was settled by David, but it was similar to that. This at the top would be if Greater Israel is divided, this is how people see it divided. If it is only going to be the portion of Israel that the other people, the other scholars look at, that would be down here below. The problem is that it's not quite as even. Whereas God talks about equally dividing the land, it's not quite as even down here. And then what I did, just to further confuse you, is to show you, well, I'll just go in order rather than do it that way. I'll go in order. Here on the second page that you have is the Euphrates River. You can see the Euphrates River I've outlined in black. It's a long river, and so you have to make the decision, if you're a biblical scholar, of exactly what portion of the Euphrates River the border line is. The Wadi El Arish is the river of Egypt that most scholars now believe is the river of Egypt that is talked about, not the Nile. You'll see old commentaries that talk about the Nile, but the majority of the new scholars now no longer believe it's the Nile River, that it is this wadi, and down here, this darker one. And I tried to outline it for you also to show you that is the wadi that is talked about down there. So that would be the southern border. All right, go to the next page and look in your packet. You'll see that I've put on here the division of Canaan under Joshua. That's way back. That's way before Ezekiel. When they come out of the land of Egypt and they go into the land of Canaan, Joshua then, they use the lots and they divide up the land, and this is how it was divided up under Joshua. So you can see it's a different outlook on that, and that the land isn't equally divided in under Joshua either. And so there's more information on there this week if you're interested in it. It's good information to kind of talk to you a little bit about how that was done if you don't have that. If you look at, yours is black and white, I know, mine's in color. If you look at this is the kingdom of David and Solomon, and you'll see this is when Israel had their largest portion of land that they inhabited. It still isn't as large as what the millennial kingdom, even the small map, not including the greater Israel, the small map. It's still bigger than that. But this shows you the amount of land. It's far bigger than what they have today. So here, speaking of that, is Israel today on the next page. If you look at that, you can see that the dark portion of the West Bank and the dark portion of the Gaza Strip, and up towards the top where you can see Lebanon and the Golan Heights up at the top, that is not land that Israel controls at this point. That is land that was given for peace. That is Palestinian controlled. If you look at the West Bank, and not so much Gaza in this map, it doesn't look like it, but if you look at the West Bank, that is a huge chunk of land that is taken out of Israel today that they cannot, Jews cannot go into that area without repercussions. We know that there's some settlements that are being built along different areas, but that's a whole nother story. That is a large amount of property that is no longer Israel. And if you look at the white between the West Bank and the Mediterranean Sea, you can see that's the biggest problem with that is it is indefensible space. If someone could shoot a rocket and there's nothing you could do. So it's an indefensible space. And the bottom is the same thing. It just shows you the chunk of land. So you can see that Israel today is just a portion, a tiny portion of what it was even under the time of David and Solomon. So you can imagine, even if you went with the smaller map and didn't go with the greater Israel map with the division, that this is a vast amount of land that Israel is going to be in control of, far more than they've had in the past. The reason I gave you all of these 4 pages here was just to validate my study when I told you I went nuts. Because these are all maps of what people think Israel is going to look like. And you're welcome to look at them and see there's all different viewpoints on there. But once again, it boils down to people like me get crazy about this stuff. But really what it boils down to is God is giving them a larger portion of land than they've ever had before. And He knows exactly where these borders are. And He has subdivided it in a very precise manner. So let's go back now to that first page. This one. That has the 2 maps, the 2 basic maps of how it's to be divided. And let's look at that. So it's divided the same way, whether you think it's the larger portion of land or whether you think it's the smaller. You guys are on YouTube when you talk, I'm just letting you know. It's on the larger portion of land or the smaller portion of land. You can see that it is divided up. Starts up at the very top, furthest away from where the holy temple is going to be, with Dan. Interesting, because in Revelation, when it talks about the 144,000 that are going to be taken out and become evangelists in the land of Israel, Dan is not mentioned. But because Dan was the first to fall into idolatry, they're the ones who had the golden calves up in the northern kingdom, and they persuaded the 10 tribes to come and worship up in the top, and they worshiped 2 golden calves.
Is that the part where we went and...
we saw that.
The cave. I did not go up there. I did not like that.
Okay. We saw that, and that is... And so Dan is not included in the 144,000 evangelists, but by God's grace, he's put back up into... I think it's interesting that he's the furthest away. Up here at the top. And then it goes down to... Dan and Asher and going all the way down. Here we have Manasseh and Ephraim. Once again, those are the sons of Joseph. Okay, and I included in your packet this week the story of that, so that it's Genesis 48, and you can read it for yourself when he brings in Ephraim and Manasseh and gives the largest portion away, and why for Joseph he did not need that land. Remember, Joseph was pretty wealthy, right? At the time, he was the second in charge of Egypt and everything, but God gives to Joseph, divides it up between his two sons, and he receives the portion that would go to Joseph. It is interesting that if you do a study of the division of the 12 tribes of Israel throughout the Bible, they vary. The names are not always the same. They change a little bit. And so that's kind of an interesting study. But when we come down to the millennial kingdom, it's the original 12 tribes.
Well, didn't you say that Joseph received two?
Ephraim and Manasseh.
Levi's not on this.
Right.
Because the priests,
That's right.
prince's portion.
That's right, exactly. And Levi, that's right. And Levi had a different land division even under Joshua. They did not own the land. They were able to get provision from each of the tribes to them to support them because they were in priestly duty, and God didn't want them, spending all their time farming and doing the things that you have to do to live. The people would provide for them so that they could do their priestly duties. So this is the northern portion of it here, and the largest, there's 7, what is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 up in the north, who away from the temple area and the prince's portion, and then there are 5 down in the southern section. If you notice, Benjamin and Judah are the closest. Benjamin up here in the Judah up here in the northern section, and Benjamin in the southern section, closest to the temple. Why do you suppose that would be? Just possibility.
He is from the tribe of Judah.
Okay.
They were faithful longer.
Yeah, that was the northern.
So Benjamin sort of integrated in with Judah in the last. They were the southern kingdom down at the bottom, and they were the ones who were faithful longer, although they end up doing just as many negative, bad things. And remember that it's the tribe of Judah that's getting taken by Ezekiel's people, that when they're all being taken into Babylon captivity. It's Judah and Benjamin and that tribe. So they have they've fallen a long ways. But in this particular map, they are the ones that are the closest to the temple. So whether or not, I'm just throwing that in there, or whether or not it's interesting in how close to the temple these are, whether does that show certain favoritism, I don't know. But the land is divided up amongst all of those in both of that. So this would be, if you believed in the smaller division, this would be in the greater Israel if you went with a longer portion of that.
The Messiah came through Judah.
Pardon me, say
The
that?
Messiah came through Judah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, all right, we got through, we went through that packet. So he, in verses 2 through 8, there it's just talking about each one of those tribes that's on your map. So you can see the map, and you can see that is exactly how it's being divided out up in the northern section, and it goes down to where the temple area is. And that's verse 9. Let's start there. It says, the district that you shall set apart for the Lord shall be 25,000. And notice what's in italics. Cubits. Remember, we've discussed that before, that is added in, that for the people who believe that is the measuring rod. I told you that Arnold does not believe that any time that it's added in, he believes it goes back to the original measurement of Ezekiel 45, which would be reeds, making it much larger. Rods or reeds. Either one. You can use either one. And it is, they're interchangeable. And so it would be a much larger portion. I mean, you can sit and argue with them, but the important thing to note is that cubits has been added in by someone who thought it made good sense. What we do know is that it's a 4-square area. It's the same on all sides, and that's really what the information is for that. So he's talking about the 25,000 cubits, or the 25,000 in width and in length, same as the other portions from the east to the west, and the sanctuary is going to sit in the center of that. Sanctuary is also called oftentimes the what? Holy oblation. That's what you'll hear it called. Verse 9, the district that you shall set apart for the Lord shall be 25,000, I'm just going to leave it out, in length, and 10,000 in width. So it's longer than it is wide, twice as long. 10, to the priests, the holy district shall belong. Now this is all repeat. We've studied this, which is that who is going to have that portion of the temple area? The Zadok priests, right? Right in that portion of it. All right, and so that's going to be the sanctuary of the Lord will be in the center. It shall be for the priests of the sons of Zadok, who are sanctified, who have kept my charge, who did not go astray when the children of Israel went astray, as the Levites went astray. So just as a reminder, we've been over this before, the Zadok priests are a portion of the Levites. It doesn't encompass the entire Levite tribe. They're a portion of the Levites. And so in this millennial kingdom, in Ezekiel's temple, God makes a very large distinction between the Zadok priests, who get to minister to him at the temple, and the Levite priests, the rest of them who aren't Zadok priests from the sons of Zadok, who are going to be the caregivers. They get to boil the meat, and they get to clean the building, and they get to be probably the temple guards and the army and the landscapers and all of those who take care of that. So they're going to still have priestly duties, but the high honor of ministering directly to the king will be only the Zadok priests, and so they will actually have that area that is in the temple, or surrounds the temple. So verse 12, and this district of land that is set apart shall be to them a thing most holy, by the border of the Levites, opposite the border of the priests. So he's calling them the priests as opposed to the Levites. The Levites will have an area that is 25,000 in length and 10,000 in width. It's the same size. Its entire length shall be 25,000 and its width 10,000. 14, and they shall not sell or exchange any of it. They may not alienate this best part of the land, for it is holy to the Lord. So we just talked about the fact that in the Mosaic law, the Levites didn't have land. So they didn't buy or sell land. They lived in the rest of the tribes and were provided by the rest of the tribes. Here, they're actually being given a portion of land. The only stipulation on that is that they can't sell it or get rid of it. It's the Lord's land. It's holy to the Lord, but it's being actually given to them. So in the millennial kingdom, they will have land. Sorry. So go to verse 15. The 5,000 in width that remain along the edge of the 25,000 shall be for general use of the city. Go back and look at some of your previous chapters. I gave you several maps on that. You'll see that there's an area that's set aside that's called city. It's where the city of Jerusalem would be for dwellings and common land. So it's a regular city area where people can live and grow things, and the city is going to be in the center of that. So if it were reeds or rods, it's 10 miles by 8 3/4 of a mile. If it's cubits, it would of course be much smaller than that.
10 miles by what?
10 miles by 8 3/4 of a mile. And these shall be its measurements. Let's see if it, does it put it? No, I was going to see if it had it in cubits on my other side, but it doesn't. These shall be its measurements. The north side 5,500, the south side 5,500, the east side 4,500, and the west side 4,500. The common land of the city shall be to the north 250, to the south 250, to the east 250, and to the west 250. So just an area called the common land of the city. The rest of the length alongside the district of the holy section shall be 10,000 to the east, 10,000 to the west. It shall be adjacent to the district of the holy section, and its produce shall be food for the workers of the city. So they'll be growing things, and God has provided an area where they'll have crops and they can grow, along with, they've got what, those amazing trees that have fruit there, that there's going to be food for the workers of the city. And the workers of the city are going to be from all of the tribes of Israel and shall cultivate it. So that's an interesting point, because it is going to be in the area of land that is right up to where Judah is, but Judah is not the only tribe that is going to actually be able to do that. It says there'll be a mixture from all of the tribes that are going to come down, and they're going to be able to cultivate that land and work that city center. So, verse 20, what's that?
They're gonna have quite a commute.
They are. They're gonna just, that's right. The entire district, we're in verse 20 now. The entire district shall be 25,000 by 25,000 foursquare. You shall set apart the holy district with the property of the city. All of this again is repeat. It's just measurements, once again telling us how specific God is with this, how clear he is at exactly where all of the borders are on this. 21, the rest shall belong to the prince on one side and on the other side of the holy district, and of the city's property next to the 25,000 of the holy district, as far as the eastern border, and the westward next to the 25,000 as far as the western border, adjacent to the tribal portions, and that is going to belong to the prince. Go back and look at some of your maps again. You'll see that it's a very hardy portion of land that's being given to the prince. It's really surprisingly large. Verse 23, as for the rest of the tribes, now he's going to talk about those that are down in the southern portion of it, below where the temple is. Benjamin is going to have a section, Simeon is going to have a section, Issachar is going to have a section, Zebulun is going to have a section, Gad is going to have a section, and they are all going to be on the southern portion of that. Verse 28, he talks about the borders shall be from Tamar to the waters of Meribeth by Kadesh. Why am I not saying that right? Kadesh. Along the brook to the great sea. It doesn't sound right in my ear.
Does anybody really know?
It doesn't sound right in my ear when I say Kadesh. That doesn't sound right. But anyway, 29.
Kathy, under Kadesh on that map you have river of, and it didn't get Xerox. What is that supposed to be?
I don't know. I haven't.
Oh.
Where is it? Which map
On
are
that
you
little
talking
map,
about?
on our map that we're looking at.
The first one?
The one.
Simeon, Issachar, Zebulun.
Down at the bottom where Kadesh, see where Kadesh is?
Uh-huh.
And then it says river of. And mine-
Egypt.
Oh,
That would be where the river of Egypt is down there, because remember that's the border.
Okay.
That wadi that you
Okay.
have in here. So it would be the river of Egypt.
Okay, thank you.
All right, in verse 29, it just says, this is the land which you shall divide by lot as an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. Now, when he talks about dividing it by lot, remember we discussed the fact that Joshua threw lots and divided that land up, where the tribes are going to go by lots. But this is already divided up. God's already done it. It's this. When they're dividing it by lot, it's where each person from the tribe, how they're going to establish themselves there. So if you're of the tribe of Manasseh, by lot, you'll be able to decide where you and your family, what portion of that you're going to have. But it's already divided, unlike with Joshua there.
And the prince is David?
Well, we've discussed the fact that many people believe that the prince is the resurrected David. Yes, that is, it's not there are people who argue that and say that it's not. We know for sure that it is not the Lord Jesus Christ. And there are people out there who teach that it is. And so, as is true with much of Ezekiel, there are a lot of opinions. We know it is not Jesus. But there are good indicators that it could very well be David, but that's not a sure thing. There are people that argue against that. All right, and so it's going to be divided by lot as an inheritance among the tribes of Israel, and these are their portions. So it is decided, and Daniel's going to get his. And so in verse 30, it's going to start talking about the gates of the city. It says these are the exits of the city. So the gates. On the north side, measuring 4,500, the gates of the city are going to be named after the tribes of Israel. So that's interesting because we also find in Revelation that in the final eternal Jerusalem that comes down, different from this one, there are also going to be gates. Remember, they're made out of one, each gate is made out of one pearl, and it's going to have the name of the 12 tribes of Israel in it. So it is like this, but it is not this. This is just something very similar here, because also, just as a note, remember that in the eternal state, not only is it going to be the 12 tribes of Israel, but the foundation is what? The 12 apostles. And so it's going to be both the leaders of the old and the leaders of the new combined together in this eternal state. Here we don't see anything about the 12 apostles because they're not born yet. And they're not here. And so anyway, it's very similar, and oftentimes people don't understand that this is not talking about the same thing, but it is a very similar thing. So these 12 gates are going to be here, and they're each one going to be named. And he just says there's a gate for Reuben, a gate for Judah, a gate for Levi. Go to verse 32, a gate for Joseph. Now there's a difference. What did we notice previous to this when they divided up the land? Manasseh and Ephraim, right? Were divided. Now Manasseh and Ephraim are not getting a gate. Joseph, who is the leader, is going to get the gate. So it's not, but Levi is added into this, whereas Levi is not added into the land division, right? Well, they have that section there, but it's different. So it's all, it can get confusing when they're not, all the lists are not exactly the same. But what we need to recognize is that when God divided up Joseph's portion way back in Genesis through Jacob, there was a purpose for that. He needed to have that done so that that land would be divided into twos. Now when we come back to this with the gate, it needs to come back down to the original 12. And so now we're talking about the sons, not the blessing that fell on them, but the literal sons of Jacob. So Levi is mentioned in there. He was one of the sons of it, and Joseph is going to be mentioned there. There's going to be a gate for Benjamin and a gate for Dan. 33. On the south side, measuring 4,500, there's 3 gates. 1 gate for Simeon, 1 gate for Issachar, and 1 gate for Zebulun. On the west side, 4,500 cubits with their 3 gates. 1 gate for Gad, 1 gate for Asher, and 1 gate for Naphtali. All the way around shall be 18,000. And the name of the city from that day shall be, the Lord is there. And in Hebrew, that is Jehovah Shammah, which means the Lord is there. Remember that there are multiple names for God throughout the Bible, right? There's Jehovah Jireh, which means that God is our provider. Jehovah Rapha, which means that God is our healer. There's Jehovah Shalom, which means the God of peace. Sidkenu, Jehovah Sidkenu, the God of righteousness. Shammah, which means ever present. That's why it's used here. The Lord is there. He is going to be ever present there. Nisi, which means our banner. There is Jehovah Ra'ah, which is the great shepherd. These are all names of God. They're all characteristics of God. All feed into the personality of what God was to his people. So here he's saying the name of Jerusalem, or the city, will now be called the Lord is there. Now the interesting thing to that is it doesn't necessarily have to mean that it will no longer be called Jerusalem, that it will be called this. He's identifying this city as the Lord is there will be the name. Remember with Solomon what happened. David and Bathsheba named their son Solomon, and then Nathan comes to them and says that God has named their son, and I'm blanking, Jedediah. That God has named their son Jedediah, Solomon. And it was a personal name that God gave to Solomon, but never do we see Solomon called Jedediah, ever, other than that one time where Nathan comes and says the Lord has named him Jedediah. I kind of believe that Solomon's going to be called Jedediah in heaven. Or in the kingdom. That's just me. There's no scriptural, but I just feel like that that's a special connection. But he's not called that anywhere in the Bible. He's always called Solomon, and so Jerusalem may still be called Jerusalem, but it is identified specifically as the Lord is ever present there. So let's see. Not to be confused, I'm going to turn really quickly. We have just a minute. I'm going to turn really quickly to Revelation 21, and I'm going to read you just a couple of verses. Revelation 21, remember, that's the end. It's the second to the last chapter of Revelation, and so he is now talking about eternity. He's talking about the 1,000-year reign is over with. We are stepping out into eternity.
No.
And he's talking about all things made new. He's talking about the new Jerusalem. And he starts out, now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. So we know this is a different thing because the borders are the Mediterranean Sea. Yeah. The Great Sea is going to be important in the Ezekiel's time frame. And so the seas are ever present. They're going to be a very important part of it. But we're talking about a new thing where there is no sea going to be there. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, a Jerusalem that we have never seen before, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he shall dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. He shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying. There shall be no more pain, for all of the former things have passed away. And he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, It is done. This is it. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit, see that word used again, all things. And I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the cowardly and the abominable, unbelieving, murderers, sexual immorality, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars will have their part in the lake, which burns with fire and brimstone. And then he talks about the New Jerusalem. He says, And then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls filled with the 7 last plagues came to me, and he talked to me, and he said, Come, I'll show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away to the Spirit to a great and high mountain. I've talked about the high mountain. And showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her light was like a most precious stone, like jasper stone, clear as crystal. And she also had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and 12 angels at the gates, and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. Just what we saw. An addition though. Now the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he who talked with me had a gold reed to measure the city, and its gates, and its walls, and the city laid out as a square, just like we've talked about. Its length as great as its breadth. And he measured the city with a reed. 12,000 furlongs. Its length and its breadth and its height are equal. And the construction of the wall was jasper, and the city was pure gold, like clear glass, and the foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with all kinds of precious stones, and he lists all the different stones there. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls, each individual gate, 1 pearl. And the street, not streets, we often talk about the streets. The street of gold was pure gold, like transparent glass. But I saw no temple in it. For the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple. The city had no need of the sun or the moon to shine, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light. And the nations of those who are saved shall walk in that light, and the kings of the earth bring their glory and their honor into it. And its gates shall not be shut at all by day, and there will never be night. But there shall by no means enter into it anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. So I wanted, and if you go on to 22, it starts talking about the river of life that is going to flow from the temple. And there he talks about the river, and he also talks about the trees that will grow alongside of it, and that there will be fruit on the trees, and the leaves will be used for the people. So as you can see by reading Revelation 21 and 22, there are a lot of things that God is giving to Ezekiel's time frame that are going to follow into eternity. But they're not the same. They're different. And so there's going to be a temple. We've read about it. We read all the measurements of it. So there's going to be a temple in Ezekiel's time frame, even though the Lamb is there ruling and reigning from that temple. When we step into eternity, all of that falls away. There is not going to be a temple. There's no need. It says, for God and the Lamb are the temple there. There's no sea. But there are many similarities we can see with the 12 gates, the addition of the 12 apostles or the foundation, the trees, many things that we see. The first time it's talked about the street of gold that is going to be there. So God is giving the millennial kingdom a great taste of what we are stepping into eternity. But it will be even more glorious when all of that burns away and the new heaven and the new earth come down and we step into eternity. So I guess I would just close by saying Ezekiel takes us a step further into what the earthly temples provided. They provided a meeting place, especially when the Shekinah glory came and was over the Ark of the Covenant, when God in the tabernacle and then later on in Solomon's temple could meet with his people and provide a way of reconciliation with his people throughout their sins. That was a great blessing. Now Ezekiel's temple is telling us there's even going to be greater blessing. And yet we can see the ending of that and know that God takes that even further into eternity, to where that blessing even increases more so. So we can thank Ezekiel for that little glimpse into what it is that we have. All right, and so we say goodbye to Ezekiel, our dear friend. We're going to miss him.